Welcome to a new episode from EduExcel. As a teacher and as an administrator in schools, I have always tried to read books on eminent personalities. Education is the cornerstone of development in any country, playing a vital role in shaping the citizens who drive the nation's progress. It empowers individuals with the skills and knowledge needed to navigate the world, understand their history and civilization, and compete globally. Within this framework, teachers are the key contributors. They shape the future of the nation by mentoring young minds, providing them with a nurturing environment, identifying their potential, believing in them, making them aware, encouraging them, teaching them, and thereby shaping the leaders of tomorrow. I have already spoken about Lala Lajpat Rai in my previous episode on education for nation building. In a few short series, we'll try to bring out the wisdom contained in his writings. A versatile personality, politician, social worker, writer, journalist, orator, and parliamentarian, Lala Lajpat Rai, popularly known as Punjab Kesari, was born on 28 January 1865 in village Dhudike in Ludhiana district of Punjab. His father, Sri Radhakishan, was a teacher of Urdu and Persian and was endowed with a deep love of learning and possessed a lofty moral character. His mother, Srimati Gulab Devi, was a very religious minded lady. Lajpat Rai inherited from his father the virtues of duty, responsibility, frankness, honesty of purpose, sacrifices, and spirit of independence, and from his mother the virtues of charity, large heartedness, tenderness, and devotion. Lajpat Rai received his elementary education partly from his father and partly from his school teachers. While in school, he usually held the top position in his class. He had the honor of winning numerous prizes too. He won the affection and admiration of his teachers. The document discusses the challenges and developments in national education in India, authored by Lajpat Rai. It reflects on the historical context of educational institutions and their roles in promoting nationalism while emphasizing the need for a more inclusive and effective educational framework. The author shares personal experiences and insights from his involvement in educational movements, highlighting both successes and failures in achieving true national education. I had an opportunity in visiting Dudike, the birthplace of Lala Lajpat Rai, in the year 2016. And in India, Lajpat Rai wrote that he owed his interest in education to his father, who was among the first group of teachers trained by the British government in normal schools in the 1860s. He was a well read and inspiring teacher who never stopped learning throughout his life. He recorded in his autobiography, his father, even at the age of 70, spent his time in reading the books and was influenced by all the progressive movements of his time. Acknowledging his abiding debt to his father for receiving first lessons in elementary education, he said, I have met numerous teachers in my life, but in India I have never come across a better teacher than he. So superb was his art of teaching that he gave his best to the pupils in the spirit of cooperation. Under the influence of his father, Lajpat Rai enunciated his educational principles, drawn heavily on his father's way of teaching. Education was not something external to a pupil, but a matter of natural unfolding of his innate capacities with the help and assistance of the teacher. This was a sharp contrast to the old system of education, which viewed the teacher in the role of a great taskmaster who poured deep into the pupil all that he was supposed to know, and he bore his seal throughout their life and acted as his accredited representative wherever he went. As a founding member, he was intimately associated with the DAV School of Lahore, raised to college later, right from its inception. He later served as its secretary for many years and took active part in the management of the college. In a booklet he wrote in Urdu, gave a historical account of the Sanskrit education in the college. He firmly believed in maintaining intellectual freedom in the educational institutions. He broke with Gurukula group headed by Lala Munshi Ram, later known as Swami Shraddhanand, on the question of making theology, Sanskrit education, and vegetarianism as compulsive part of the college education. Though not opposed to the inclusion of Sanskrit in the scheme of college and school studies, Lajpat Rai was in favor of English education and the teaching of modern sciences. He started the Dayanand Anglo-Vedic College Samachar, a monthly magazine to offer defense of rational and progressive views against the orthodox line exposed by some Arya Samajists. For full 25 years, he gave the best in him to the DAV College, grudging neither time nor money nor energy, and doing all he could do to ensure its success and progress. His duties were by no means confined to collecting subscriptions, doing publicity work, conducting and writing for periodicals, but included close associations with staff and students and supervision of different departments, particularly the boarding houses. Apart from overseeing the management and administration of education, he also taught for some time the subject of history to the college classes. An authority on educational matters, he tendered evidence before the Indian University Commission. The suggestions he gave to improve the teaching of physical science, history, political science, economy, English, and Sanskrit were most valuable and ahead of his times. He wanted the university bodies such as the Senate and Syndicate to be manned by teachers and educationists and not by government officials. Lajpat Rai was appreciative of several aspects of the British system of education. Some of them he considered best suited to the Indian uh, uh, Indian situation and quite capable of raising the educational standards there. He was also well acquainted with the French system of education and devoted a chapter in his book entitled National Education in India. He also made an extensive use of Jonathan's French Scots book Patriotism in the Making. He made an in depth study of the report of the Commission on the Reorganization of Secondary Education in the USA 1917 and the various bulletins based on the recommendations of the report. All these received his critical attention and he drew heavily on them. In India, a critic. Lajpat Rai appraised the British education in India in two parts. The first part provided the critic with special focus on what was not desirable. In the second part, he focused on the positive program of national education. He assailed the British methods of teaching adopted in the Indian educational institutions. He found that in their art of teaching they failed to take cognizance of the individual boy or girl. It was a kind of mechanical process aimed at filling the student's mind with so many facts, figures, and the stuff of a particular stereotyped kind. The teacher cared more for examinations and discipline rather than for the nurturing of the mind and body of his students. The sole emphasis was to finish so many pages within a given time and to prove to the examiner that the boy remembered what had been taught to him. Regrettably, in India, independence of thought and action was punished, and obedience and cramming were rewarded and admired. The inspecting officers, too, while recording their opinions about the discipline of the school inspected, had no time to notice if the teaching was directed towards the development of the faculty of thinking or not. He regretted that educational system the British had introduced was more mechanical, wasteful, individualistic, and competitive rather than practical, useful, and cooperative. If the aim of education was to fit children into the life of the community, the school was the place where the children learned group initiative, group responsibility, or in other words, social functioning. The function of education was to teach the child to think and to act individually and cooperatively and not to repeat merely from memory the thoughts of others. The test of success was ability to work with others in a spirit of mutuality and cooperation and not to aggressively compete to surpass others. Nor was the principal object of life to seek a career or to be an academic animal. Such preoccupation with careerism neither enabled a man to think or act independently, nor did it make him fit enough to choose his own way or an independent work. The only stimulus to education of the day was government service and nothing else. Social animal was perforce reduced to academic animal in pursuit of a career in the government service. Actually, the whole process was self destructive as it was self defeating in regard to the very purpose of education. The object of life was to raise social efficiency and better citizens in the society. As against this, it was a vicious ideal which placed not excellence but fashion on a high pedestal. Social efficiency was the sine qua non of national progress, and that education was the best means to secure it. Lajpat Rai regretted that the English education in India was producing snobs, and public schools were the factories where this type was produced. This type of education, by distorting India's noble and heroic past history, had the effect of making his people look inferior in their own eyes. To remove the causes and destroy the influences that created the atmosphere of despondency and pessimism, he wanted his people to draw lessons out of their glorious past, but with an eye on their future destiny. He condemned the present system of education as defective, evil, emasculatory, and he found the genesis of it in political situation rather than educational problems. Therefore, he thought that the boycott of government controlled and aided colleges was imperatively necessary. The present system of education, he warned, was so corrupt and ruinous that its continuance any longer was serious menace to the future prospects of the nation. He, however, did not favor mere boycott of the English education, but favored increasing their own institutions. Quoting Mr. Fisher, he maintained that no state could flourish without a sound popular system of education aiming at the diminution of poverty, ignorance, unhappiness, misconduct, and disease. Such education to be of marketable value outside India and what would enable them to earn a livelihood wherever they went. In this connection, he emphasized the importance of practical and manual training. He lamented that Indians were never trained to work with their hands. Rajpat Rai criticized the prevailing notion of indulging in exaggerated emphasis on good buildings, a slight increase in salaries of the teachers, and a great emphasis on a superior and a better knowledge of English in the name of improvement in the quality of education. The education, he held, should make an ample provision for all round development of human personality, his faculty of head and heart, as in the case of the Japanese system, besides educating young men in arts, crafts, languages, humanities, science, and technology, as they should be taught the art of self defense along with fencing, boxing, archery, shooting, swimming, and running. In addition, they should be necessarily provided facilities for both indoor and outdoor games. Should bring forth culturally useful citizens capable of the service of the self and the society and meeting the ordinary needs and getting comforts under whatever circumstances they were put in. Smarting under the yoke of an alien rule, he found their national planners inhibited from laying down their own national ideals for immediate realization and chalking out lines of national activities for the amelioration of the conditions of their people. If economically India was poor, he clarified it was because its people had been handicapped by the want of professional and technical instructions. The present system had failed to train Indians for political work in manufacturers, commerce, and the application of science to the industrial life. The educational wastage was everywhere excessive, and analysis showed that it was largely due to underpayment and want of proper training in the case of teachers. The government had failed to provide free and wholesome education to every child at public cost, and that education was not made compulsory up to the age of 18, nor did it take any initiative to apply to India the policy of the English Education Act of 1918. From 1908 onwards, Lajpat Rai visited many countries, especially England, America, and Japan. During his stay in Japan, he got a still deeper awareness of the defects in the system of education prevailing in India, the chief being that it had no marketable value outside India. He wrote that an Indian matriculate or even a Bachelor of Arts could earn a livelihood in Japan or USA only as an unskilled laborer. He could get only such menial jobs as washing dishes, attending on the table, doing physical labor in fields or on the roads. Even here also he found himself unfit because he had never been trained to work with his hands. This lack of training in some trade or craft proved a great handicap in later life. It stood in the way his growing into a man or constructive member of the society. He found the Indian system of education flawed also in another respect, impinging on its cultural side. An Indian, especially a North Indian, had no ear for music nor an eye for a picture or a painting. Neither could he sing, play, recite, or even tell a story. If he was taken to a concert or an exhibition of fine arts, he felt as if he were in a prison. He could appreciate, enjoy, or admire none of it. In India, spending time on these activities was viewed as mere wastage of time. This was in utter contrast to state of education in Japan, where ample provision was made for the cultivation of both mind and body. This lent perfection to their system of physical culture as well. The country, he felt, was in dire need of better mechanics, more efficient carpenters, skillful electricians, and resourceful chemists. It was only such men who would make India self-reliant, developed, and strong enough to compete with the outside world in the output of their industries. Lajpat Rai also reviewed the way in which languages were being taught. Indian boys were expected, one and all, to know the old masters of the English language. But examinations were conducted with an eye on what was good, correct, and idiomatic English. Numerous boys were prevented from pursuing higher courses like medicine, commerce, engineering, and mining, for they lacked the ability to pass a particular paper involving translation from vernaculars into English. Likewise, a student opting to become a scholar of Sanskrit, Persian, or Arabic had to satisfy the examiner in the way as the one who had working to earn the master's degree in English language and literature. In fact, the education thus imparted had generally no relation to the chief work of the boy's or the girl's life. He cautioned that they must not hesitate in getting into the modern world. If they did so, they would miss the respect and the status that was their birthright and for which they ought to strive. For the world would not let them alone if they insisted to be let alone. The world was tending to become one family. Fundamental human nature was the same all over the world. Lajpat Rai saw in education a great force for national regeneration. In one of his earliest articles entitled Education in India, he emphasized the importance of education and saw in it a key to the efficiency and progress of a nation. This efficiency, he asserted, depended upon the amount and nature of brain power which it put forth in the affairs of life. Education was the foundation of all national greatness in point of wealth as well as intellect. In fact, it provided all the building blocks of a strong, self-reliant, and researching nation. He ruled over the staggering illiteracy and ignorance of the Indian people and noted that over a century and a quarter of British rule had failed to educate more than 5 or 6% of the people of India, while Japan had been wholly educated within less than 40 years. For him, the most important national duty for any state was the educational work and the education as the greatest national asset. He was struck by the fact that how much importance the advanced, independent, and self governed nations like England and America and Germany attached to education and educational efforts, whereas in India the alien government made little effort in this regard. As a result, fairly intelligent population had been reduced to the position of drawers of water and hewers of wood for want of education and opportunities. The Anglo-Indian bureaucracy let this happen through their policy of callous neglect of the education of the subject people. In their case, no heed was given to the injunction given by the British statesmen for their own citizens that education was a question of life and death for a nation. For Lajpat Rai, education was a means of developing the total personality of child. The ancient system of Guru and the Chela, he explained, due to its rigidity and tendency of enslaving the pupil's mind was ill suited to the full blossoming of the child's personality. Education must promote free inquiry and scientific temper. The boys and girls must be brought up in the midst of the society with whose problems they had to grapple when they grew up. Education must prepare them to meet the challenges of life. It would not be correct policy to let boys and girls grow in isolation, ignorant of the conditions of actual life, innocent of the social amenities of life, with no experience of sudden demands and emergencies of group life. Such nurturing would deprive them of the most valuable elements in their education. For the aim of education was to fit men and women for battle of life. Any move to encourage them to grow into anchorites and aesthetics would be detrimental to their full growth and the national future. The youth of tomorrow, with its greatest asset, were to be the citizens of tomorrow. From among them would come the nation's statesmen, administrators, generals, inventors, captains of industry, and manufacturers, as much as their philosophers and thinkers and teachers. He lamented the fatal tendency towards negation of life prevalent to an alarming extent among Indians. This to him was the fundamental basis of all their national weakness. Belief in mukti or salvation as the chief aim of their life made them find supreme merit in killing desire and escaping from the life of senses with the view of escaping from the pain of rebirth. This attitude of self negation led them to shun life, belittle it, and eventually escape from it. Therefore, the foremost objective of the national system of education was to destroy this belief and create jest in real life and to emphasize that life was the highest boon to be prized and preserved and prolonged and enjoyed. He also favored a change in the teacher taught relationship. He wanted teachers to discard the tone of command and authority and shed the idea of molding the students into patterns of their own liking. Rather, they must learn to intelligently understand their pupils along with giving due recognition to their impulses, desires, and ideas, and play the role of helpful guides. They should inculcate in them the spirit of free inquiry and a scientific temper, and not a habit of slavish submission to authority, be it that of the sacred scriptures, religion, and tradition. They should give primary to the values of reason, common sense, experience, and spirit of science. He assigned a high role to the future teachers and gurus of India, but only if they abandoned their idea of molding their pupils into patterns of their own choice. The boys and girls should be treated, he said, as ends. The role of the teacher was of a helpful guide and not that of a master endowed with authority and command. The system that stressed the authority of the teacher or the parent was based on a suspicion of human nature and human tendencies. It was distrustful of childhood and youth since it openly favored their control and disciplined subordination. And where sincerity had no respect for the instincts of the pupils, he cited the example of the Japanese people who never hit their children and yet their children were models of reasonableness. The Japanese maintained an attitude of respect towards their children, treated them as their equals, and never enforced authority and penalties in childhood. He urged the Indian parents and teachers to learn to respect the child and imbibe a feeling of reverence for him. According to him, the ideal system was one that ought to produce self education. Right from the beginning, this experiment was well designed with the full planning of the course for 10 years. The ashram admitted both boys and girls of 4 years. Though it charged no fees, it expected the parents to contribute as much as possible. The curriculum included the teaching of such subjects as history, geography, mathematics, and economics. The medium of instruction was the vernacular or Gujarati through, though English was also taught as a secondary language. The ashram provided training in handloom weaving. There was no usual holidays as such, but for 2 days in a week, instead of the routine work schedule, the students were encouraged to do whatever work they liked to do. This ashram did a signal service to the nation under the patronage of Gandhiji up to 1933. Since then, Gandhiji shifted to Sevagram Ashram, Wardha. Sevagram Ashram. This was one that ought to produce self-reliant, aggressive in order to be progressive men and women, as this was what the new India wanted. In the fast moving world, Lajpat Rai envisaged that economic interests of the people were paramount in determining the scheme of education for a country, and if the former appeared to be at cross purposes with those of the rulers, it would have a vitiating effect on the whole scheme. The truth was that no foreign government would initiate or maintain or support or tolerate a scheme seeking to train men for political or economic freedom, nor could it be expected to rule exclusively in the interest of the subject nation. With the best of the intentions, the best and the noblest of its agents had an innate bias in favor of their own people. Under the circumstances, no foreign government not responsible to the people of the soil could be trusted to initiate and enforce a proper national scheme of education. This, according to him, was the rationale behind the desire of the nationalists to open national schools and colleges, universities, because freedom and education were interrelated. To the questions, how does the education become national? Was it local, provincial, denominational, or sectarian education? Was it the language which was the medium of instruction which made it national, or the agency through which it was imparted, or the agency which controlled and regulated it, or the books which were taught, or the standards and ideals which underlay it? He replied, truth was neither local nor national nor even international. It was simply truth. Science and philosophy expounded truth. We could not afford to reject the sciences and the philosophy of Western scientists and philosophers, the literature of the West merely because it happened to be non Indian, and we should discontinue learning the modern sciences of medicine, surgery, pathology, hygiene, engineering, civil, mechanical, electrical, agricultural, and mining, botany, geology, zoology, because these were so much advanced from the things that we had in our literature of these subjects. We could go back to the old methods and must adopt the modern sciences of navigation, commerce, banking, and insurance, etc. Lajpat Rai included in the list of national ideals for India political liberty, economic independence, social solidarity, and religious freedom. For him, they were most essential for freeing the people from misery, poverty, disease, ignorance, and slavery of every kind. It was a truism, he averred, every model of education should conform to the national ideals handed down from generation to generation and improved, adapted, and assimilated in course of history. Education was the main instrument through which a nation was able to achieve social, economic, and political progress befitting the aspirations and the expectations of a nation. The national ideals, he emphasized, should not be of a shifting type, nor should they be but dominated by expediency of temporary loss or gain. Be attuned to the needs of modern day life. Any short-sighted, narrow, and chauvinistic approach in the formulation of ideals on the part of a nation, he warned, could prove disastrous. For tendencies created, prejudices reared, sentiments disseminated, when they had gone deeper into the psychology of the people, were difficult to be uprooted. There should be no haste in creating national tendencies, prejudices, impressions, and preferments. For it was highly difficult to correct them later, as any effort to do so would involve colossal waste of energy and opportunity. Therefore, no wise leader should undertake the task light-heartedly. For education to fulfill its objective, the nation ought to be very clear on its future direction of forces it was expecting to generate and create. In traditional parlance, salvation was supposed to be the ultimate end of the Indians, and the educational system that they designed in the ancient times was attuned to promote and foster it. But to Lala Lajpat Rai, Mukti or Nirvana or Moksha were but mystery ridden delusions. He thought it problematic to confuse national ideals with the things in the hereafter, for he insisted that they must project the gospel of life. The inculcation of the mukti among the young men tended to have a pernicious effect on them because they needed was to have jest in life. Glorification of the life of renunciation and poverty ultimately hampered the jest and adventure of living. The nation, which was possessed of tendencies of otherworldliness at the expense of pleasures and comforts of this life, could not keep pace with the spirit of progress. Indian history bore witness to the fact that how much travails and tribulations the people suffered on this count. He warned that India could not make progress so long as this fatal life negating tendency continued to possess her whole being. Instead of chasing an imaginary salvation in afterlife, the dire need of the nation was to find salvation in the existing life. Real salvation consisted in freedom from misery, poverty, disease, ignorance, and slavery of every kind in this world, now and here, for ourselves and thereafter for our successors. Likewise, the same applied in respect of the salvation of the country and in case of those living. It was imperative that the youth of the country be initiated in the gospel of life, that all life was real and invaluable and no mere illusion. It was something to be prized, maintained, and enjoyed. Instead of hankering after the mystery of the other world, they should look upon it merely the continuation of the present one. A happy, contented, simple, and carefree life in here and now required that man must be free from the burden of poverty, disease, and ignorance. This to him indeed was real salvation. For a country sunk deep into poverty and ignorance, he insisted there should be no salvation except for a handful of people wallowing in affluence. Even salvation in the mystic sense had could be had save under the conditions of perfect bliss, he said. Such a liberated state was a logical outcome and culmination of the political, social, and economic freedom. Education system of the nation should prepare the people to face the challenge of hunger, violence, and exploitation stalking the world, starting immediately from their own nation. The scheme of national education was designed to cope with the needs and aspirations of the people and to promote their welfare and realize their national destiny. It should aim at meeting particular national needs of a particular nation. Each country's own model of education had to be distinct, having special features based on custom, tradition, history, culture, physical needs, climate, and world spirit. Besides, it had to be based on general principle of betterment of all. Any modification in it should be according to the social and spiritual needs of each community. It was the responsibility of the state to provide for full, free, and compulsory education of each child, male or female, and thus to help them become useful citizens. The foremost political obligation of the state was to protect the individual, his social and national interests, always keeping before it the maxim that an individual handicapped was a national handicapped. Universal compulsory education was therefore be the first charge or revenue of a government. In all the free countries, commensurate with the educational interest, the expenditure on education was to be at par with defense budget and worthy to be safeguarded. It was only in dependent countries that education was employed as a means of keeping them in continuous bondage. Education, while building on a nation's past achievements, ought to continue updating, upgrading, and broad basing its knowledge component, always keeping pace with the latest advances in science and technology, art and craft, humanities, and social sciences. In trying to clarify the concept of national education, Lajpat Rai posed the following questions. Are we going to reject the sciences and the philosophy of the non Indian scientists and philosophers? Are we going to reject Shakespeare, Bacon, Schiller, Whitman, Emerson because they are not Indians? What about the learning modern sciences of medicine, surgery, pathology, hygiene, engineering, botany, zoology, commerce, banking, insurance, etc., because they are so much advanced from the things that we have in our literature on these subjects? Are we going back to the old methods? Shall we reject the modern improvements? In this context, it would be worthwhile to refer to what he said on Kautilya's Arthashastra. He asserted that Arthashastra might have been excellent in the good old times, and if there was anything in it still valuable, they should adopt it, but they would be cutting their nose to spite their faces if they failed to insist on the teaching of the modern and up-to-date Arthashastra which controlled and ordered the economic life of the world. The above critical comment would equally apply to the demand for the revival of Ayurvedic and Unani system of medicine. He would rule out reviving them if it was to be at the cost of modern medical colleges and modern methods of midwifery and child nursing. Their survival would mean going back to the traditional methods of bringing their men and women into the world and then letting them to die by hundreds in every thousands in order to be more truly national. This no less applied to modern warfare in that it would be fatal for Indians to rely on bows, arrows, swords, and spears at the cost of learning modern military sciences. All education was a means to an end, and the end was life, a reaching out, a progress, continuous, unattending, and unhampered. As life admitted of no division, so progress also was really indivisible into compartments. Life, a healthy progressive life, required a cooperation and functioning of all the faculties. Its cooperative referendum was admittedly not life negating but life affirming. He added that the aim of all sound education was to reach the individual, that the growth towards freedom was progress. It must inculcate the spirit that every human being was the master of his own destiny and neither fate nor karma was above control. It must also teach that the road to progress lay in the voluntary identification of oneself with his or her social group and with the overarching entity standing above them all was the state as representative of the nation. Without this identification, the progress or growth towards freedom was difficult to attain. The aim of all publicly imparted education, he held, was to increase the productivity of its citizens. An education which did not prepare its recipients to receive their productivity, their own usefulness to themselves, as well as to the society of which they are members, was certainly flawed. No person could live on air, much less could a nation. The national education should therefore enable every citizen to have good life and help others to have it. Lajpat Rai reviewed with approval the elevating role of education. He saw in education a great force to arouse the people from the stupor of backwardness, superstition, and wretchedness. It was a potent means to rouse them to action for their rights and liberties. His profound awareness of the problems of education was manifest in everything he wrote on the subject. He bracketed education with other basic needs of life such as food, raiment, and shelter. Education to him was a mental food for the nourishment of head and heart, as much as a necessity as the food in the material sense. His appeal to the people was that they should spare all they had for educating their children. Through simple living, they could further the cause of education, build character, and establish a claim to be the arbiter of their own fortunes. He said, the duty of every Indian patriot, then, consists in educating his people to formulate their will and acquire the training, the discipline, and the power of imposing it on their future masters. Model. National education in common parlance had correlation with the birth of nation states, but the idea received more constructive impetus and concrete shape only after the First World War. In those turbulent times, dominant aim in education had come to be recognized as the development of a sense of loyalty to the nation, and it was accepted that only the national system of education was accredited to reflect the working of national life. By instinct, national education often insisted on those parts of training which went to strengthen the national character. Lajpat Rai reflected on the concept of national education as far back as 1986 at the time of laying the foundation of DAV school at Lahore. He then used the idea to infuse life into the various institutions that came to be started under him to impart education on national lines from time to time. While endorsing Mrs. Annie Besant's postulates on national education, Lajpat Rai did not approve her rejection of the sciences and the philosophy of Western scientists and philosophers because they happened to be non-Indians. He was convinced that no country on the face of the globe could, under modern conditions, live an isolated and self-contained life. The evolution of national education, he cautioned, would come through foresight, wisdom, and thoughtful guidance. Only by seeing things in true perspective before forming policies and for formulating plans for constructive upbuilding of the nation could they advance their national ideals. The foremost lesson that needed to be assiduously and persistently taught to the pupil was that there was nothing like fate or destiny. Even karma was always controllable and manageable by one's own efforts as well as by changes in one's social environment. The true task of education was to foster among the people the crusading spirit to stand up before every wrong and to be free of the evils of instinctual capacity, ignorance, self complacency, and self fatalistic submission before adverse circumstances. Rajput Rai pleaded for formulating the scheme of national education within the framework of national postulates and modern day needs. Hence, he laid bare the nature, scope, and content of Indian education in terms of the following general principles. 1. National education is necessary for national safety. The efficiency of a nation does not mean merely military efficiency. The latter is bound up by its economic and industrial efficiency, and this in turn requires an effective national education. Assuming, therefore, that security from without is the first duty of a state, only popular universal education can make it possible. Universal popular education must be provided by the state. Any attempt to provide for national education by private agencies and private funds is futile. 2. Duty of a state does not end with elementary education. The economic and industrial efficiency of the nation depends upon technical and industrial education, and that also must be provided by the state. Nor can the state ignore the necessity of higher education, for intelligent and efficient leadership depends on that. 3. State should make a provision for the general health and physical well-being of the child as a part of national education. 4. State should realize its duty to bring up and to educate the child to become a prudent citizen. The capacity and willingness of parents is meaningful. 5. At no time can or will private efforts to further education be dispensed with. These should be directed to fill up the gaps and to supply the particular classes with a view to bring up every class in the nation to the level of national efficiency. This was how he arranged needs of education priority-wise: more schools and more teachers, good schools and more teachers, good schools and good contented teachers, vocational schools including schools for instructions in commerce and foreign languages, technological institutions, continuation schools, and lastly more high schools and more universities. Lala Lajpat Rai was a passionate and visionary educationist who believed education was the most powerful tool for national development, social reform, and liberation from British rule. An ardent supporter of the Arya Samaj, Rai helped found and actively manage the DAV College Trust and Management Society, which established schools and colleges in India. The DAV College Managing Committee operates over 900 schools worldwide, including educational institutions in India, the USA, Singapore, Nepal, and the United Kingdom. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. My email ID and WhatsApp is given in this slide. Thanks a lot.